Thank you for everybody joining us here today. It's a really important day, and it's important we have elements of ceremony for today. I've got a short speech I'm going to deliver now. Last year I think I carried out a book and I talked about the book, which was a first edition, which talks about the Treaty of Versailles. This year I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I talked about the origins of Remembrance Day last year and the poppy and the association of the poppy. But it seemed to me, when I was thinking about writing a speech, that for a teenager living over 100 years after the end of the First World War, from which it first originated, the idea of the whole ceremony might seem a little odd. So I thought I'd talk about that. And I looked up the definition of remembering and what it means to remember. And the first one I got was to recall to mind by an act or effort of memory, or to think again. But the last veteran who served in First World War was Harry Patch, who was aged 111 years old. He was a British Army soldier. And he died over 12 years ago, in 2009. There are many more still alive today who served in World War II, but most of those will now be in their 90s. My father was actually evacuated in World War II, and he died a few years ago. He was born in 1934. So, you know, frankly, they aren't going to be with us too much longer because of the age they are. So in many respects, the living memory of these wars will soon be gone. And there's a problem in that the poppy, which is how we recognise Remembrance Day, tends to focus on the loss of the soldiers in both world wars. But we know that over about 90% of the losses in the wars were actually civilians. They were, how you might put, innocents. So if we value remembrance, I think it's important for us to also reframe it in a way that keeps it relevant to us all and to young people. Another part of the definition I looked at was remembering is to retain in the memory, to keep in mind or be aware of. And this is the decision we make as a society, to keep this in mind. And specifically the two world wars fresh in our minds. And we do this because of the considerable impact those wars had. And it was coined, the First World War, the war to end wars. And the Second World War, a fight against oppression and occupation by international fascism. And the impact here, as a history teacher, and there's another history teacher over there, the impact here is a different one that we think about. Because we're thinking about the long-term changes that were brought about by the outcome of those people fighting. What would the world have looked like if Europe had been restructured after World War I with Nazi occupation? We wouldn't have had a Cold War. What would have happened to the Jews across the world, those that were remaining, not the 6 million that were murdered? No Israel, no Palestine. What would Europe have looked like had the empires in Europe not collapsed as a result, largely collapsed as a result? And what about the massive acceleration of innovation that took place in both world wars? None of those things would have happened. And there would have been no Spanish flu probably afterwards, for which, and no 1929 depression, no Russian Revolution. All of these things would have meant the future was totally and utterly different. But the other part of that definition was retaining in memory. And this for me is one of the key aims. The true impact on human life: 40 million died in World War I, 50 million died of the Spanish flu that followed in 1919, then 75 million in World War II. Those numbers are hard to comprehend. To put it in context, around 5 million have died nationally from something that you will be telling your grandchildren in years to come, the coronavirus. And that's not to underplay its impact, just to tell you the impact of those wars that we're remembering. It's also important that we keep those memories inclusive. You know, as a result of the wars resulting in the last vestiges of empires, they were truly global. And more than 2 million Africans died in World War I as part of their colonial masters, fighting for their colonial masters in World War II. About 6 to 7 million died in Indochina. 2.5 million Indian troops who supported the British war effort in World War II also lost their lives. And some of these soldiers of colour were recognised for bravery, and yet were paid 3 times less than the average soldier. Did you know that there is actually a black poppy to remember in other parts of the world, and sometimes in this country, those soldiers who fought and died of colour in World War I and World War II? What about the women who supported the war effort, taking jobs in the factories? Many women as part of the French resistance movement, or offering safe havens for Jews in the German occupied territories. And then, of course, the women who never got to marry to see their husbands, their fathers, their children return from those wars. We remember these as well. And finally, it's worth remembering the impact of the war continues today. Syria, Yemen, Mexico, Ethiopia. More recently, the insurgents in Afghanistan. All of these cause innocent lives to be lost. Did you know that there's a white poppy, been around since 1933, that raised funds for non-violent conflict resolution? So whilst the iconography of the poppy, the one I'm wearing here now and many of you can see around you, is important to help us remember, we remember the people that haven't had the opportunities we've had as a result of war. Those who are heroes, those who fought without choice, and those who have lost their lives or suffered by being caught in the middle of wars. And by keeping all of this in our memory, we show empathy and respect and hope to make the future a better one for all of us. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Tom now, school captain, to say a few words.
Well, welcome, and thank you all for attending this morning. As we stand here, paying our respects to all those who have fallen, we look closer to home, to Borden. Borden can remember the 60 boys whose lives were taken in both the First and Second World War. Each life had a purpose. Each life had a home to come home to. But instead, each and every one of those boys decided that the greatest thing to do was to defend their country. We must thank them for that. I was given the opportunity to read a book which outlined the fallen war heroes of our school. Inside listed entries by heroes, whether it's writing back to their families or just comments made about them. One of the entries stood out to me, made in honour of Gordon Stevens. Gordon was a farmer and a former Borden boy who enlisted into the army in 1915. But in February of 1917 was taking part in an attack on the German lines. Despite being isolated, and he fought off the German attack, killing 5 soldiers. He was awarded the Military Cross by King George V. He survived the war and returned home as a farmer. What is particularly striking about this story is the words they used. He was described as acting courageously. This embodies what us as a school should be looking to strive to do every day. That idea of resilience. And it does show that even anyone here can do the most extraordinary of things. I'd like to once again all thank you for being here today, and I hope this example has given you the chance to understand what past Borden boys have done for our freedom. Thank you.
So before we have our minute's silence, I'm just going to read the poem that the rest of the school is going to hear over the tannoy now. And this poem, written by a man called John McRae, who actually was a surgeon, who was one of the people over in on the front lines in a field hospital who was treating people. And he noticed that where the graves were often buried, post-haste, after battles, poppies grew. It's called In Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amidst the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from flailing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. And I hope some of you, if you haven't already visited the Somme or eat abroad, go to that dressing station, which you can go and visit, and think about those words that surgeon, that doctor who was trying to save lives, wrote, and what he meant by that, about the loss of life, and about the fact that people would never see the future that we take for granted. Okay, it's just coming up to 11, so I would now ask us all to have a minute's silence, which will be followed by the last post. Thank you. thank you everybody for taking part in this. I think it's really important when you have ceremonies. I think it's an important thing for any school to have ceremonies and to think about things that really matter. I forgot to mention, I would like to mention, thank you to all the representatives of the Old Wardenians who have chosen to join us here, who represent also the past of the school, and you represent the future. So let's make it a better one for everybody. Thank you.